episode of Tar Heel Teachers on the Road. I'm in Wilmington at the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation Type 1 Nation Summit to learn about how schools can increase our support for students living with Type 1 diabetes. The Type 1 Nation Summit is a full day of education and empowerment for our Type 1 diabetes community. The summit brings together Type 1 diabetes experts, physicians, and researchers to share their knowledge of the latest treatments, breakthroughs in research, and the psychosocial aspects of living and thriving with Type 1 diabetes. This year, the UNC Wilmington Fisher Student Center is the site of the first ever Type 1 Nation Summit, sponsored by the Wilmington market of the JDRF Triangle, Eastern North Carolina chapter. Joining us now is Tanner Barton, who served as keynote speaker. Hi, Tanner.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for chatting with us. So you shared a lot of personal information about your personal experience being a Type 1 diabetic. You actually was diagnosed at 8 years old. So tell us about your experience becoming a Type 1 diabetic at that age.
Mm-hmm. So at that age when I was diagnosed with Type 1 diabetes, it was a very difficult time in my life because I was the only one in my family diagnosed with Type 1 diabetes. And Type 1 is an autoimmune disease, but it was hard to understand that and not see anybody else in my family or my extended family also living with the disease. I then went to school, and I was the only Type 1 diabetic in my elementary school. And it wasn't until I became connected with JDRF at a Walk to Cure Diabetes that I realized there was a greater community of people living with Type 1 or supporting loved ones who have the disease.
So talk about your experiences as an elementary student, the only one in your school that had Type 1 diabetes. Did you get a lot of support from your teachers? How did they support you? How could they have supported you? Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So my teachers were very supportive. From what I remember, they always wanted me to take care of myself and do what I needed to do so I could be healthy and also in class. I vividly remember my fourth grade teacher. She would always meet with me if ever I was low and had a low blood sugar and had to go to the clinic. And then when I would come back, if we were in independent reading time, we were working in small groups, she would pull me aside and she would go over any of the instruction that I had missed. So I felt like I was never missing a beat. When I went to fifth grade, we started switching classes. And again, that was a little tough because if I missed a class because my blood sugar was high or low when I was in the clinic aid, then I felt like I had to find that teacher and track that teacher down. But at the end of the day, we always had a reading period in our homeroom. And during that time, I was able to work with my teachers and I was able to go and talk with any of the teachers from classes that I had missed. So that worked to be really well. It's just having that interaction with them and that open and honest communication both ways made a huge difference.
And students or young people who have Type 1 diabetes, they're managing a lot. I was just listening, you talk to a family. There's so many different components to it in terms of managing your stress and managing your meal plan and all those things. So it's not an easy disease to navigate.
No, it's not. And I think something that's very frustrating for people living with Type 1, especially if you're working with elementary age children, is assuming that their blood sugar is high because they ate something they shouldn't have, or their blood sugar is low because they gave themselves too much insulin. There are stress, environmental factors. There are a whole slew of things that can lead to higher or low blood sugars. So some individual may be doing everything by the book and the blood sugar should be within that optimal range, but for one reason or another, it's not. So just continuing to support that individual and tell that individual that you empathize with them and you're helping them throughout the process speaks volumes, because if the blame starts to come into effect, then that's just going to create a downward spiral and their control will be even worse than what they had been doing.
And it's also important for us to remember that each individual is different and each individual navigates diabetes in a different path. We all don't have the same experience with Type 1 diabetes.
Correct. What works for one individual may not work for another individual. That's in my keynote. I said, find what works best for you. There are so many different tips and tricks, but what works for one person may not be the best solution for you. So figure out what works for you and then own that solution, own that treatment, and take it in stride.
And you've been very intentional about making sure that diabetes does not define you. You've been a college athlete, really competing at high levels as a swimmer. So how did you have that determination just to keep living your life and not letting it define you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. fortunately, I have a lot of intrinsic motivation, and I knew what I wanted to do in my life, and I knew that I wanted to swim. I knew that I wanted to race. I knew that I wanted to compete at that high level because I really enjoyed it, and I did not want diabetes to be something that prevented me from reaching my full potential. And when you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you can't control that diagnosis. It's nothing that we did or I did to be diagnosed with the disease. So I was then going to do everything within my control to take care of the disease so it wouldn't negatively impact my goals and my pursuit for that excellence. So I continue to monitor. I continue to make very conscientious decisions, and I was trying to control the disease as best I could, especially because the disease was something that I couldn't control when diagnosed.
And one way that you have really helped to contribute in a positive way, you were a youth ambassador at 9 years old, and you have just donated so much of your time with JDRF in order to make certain that we do one day find a cure for this disease.
Yes, I have, and I'm very grateful for all of the opportunities that I've had and the individuals I've been able to interact with, because we are all trying to do our very best to turn type 1 into type none.
That's great. Tell us about the One Walk and why that's important. Have you heard of schools that have really gotten on board with that in various communities throughout the United States? Tell us about what you know about One Walk and what you've seen work in communities.
Yes, no, great question. So the One Walk is a fundraising event for JDRF, but it's more than just a fundraising event. It's an opportunity for people living with the disease to connect with one another and to meet individuals within the area that are also either directly living with the disease or indirectly helping someone they love with the disease. There are schools that have One Walks. I'm from the Central Ohio area. I live in Indiana now, but I was born and raised right outside of Columbus, Ohio. And there are schools within the Ohio region that have One Walks as part of their community events and their school events. So oftentimes it's led by staff or a few really supportive parents involved in a PTO organization. And together they come together to raise awareness and raise funds for diabetes research.
That's great, and it really helps the students to know that they're not alone, that other individuals navigate this experience, and that you too can navigate it well.
Yes, and I think it also creates it creates a dialogue that sometimes isn't there. People may not ask questions about diabetes, or they may be uncomfortable asking questions because they're not sure what they can and cannot ask. But when a school is having an event like a One Walk, people feel more open to asking those questions, and then it really allows some of those barriers to be broken and some of those stereotypes to be broken as well. So it creates a dialogue that might not have been held prior to the event being hosted by the school.
Thank you so much, Shannon. We appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Type 1 diabetes affects 5 to 9% of the people around the world, who sometimes find it emotionally draining. These individuals may also feel scared, frustrated, angry, and discouraged at times. Stress has a direct link with the glucose level. Whether it is a physical or mental stress, it is proved that it can elevate blood sugar levels. Type 1 diabetes does not just affect the diabetic. Caregivers also shoulder a heavy load, which can be quite stressful. It is important for families to find ways to positively navigate this chronic illness. So now I'm here with Ann Sutton, and she just gave a wonderful presentation about managing the emotions associated with type 1 diabetes. She is a parent of a child who has type 1 diabetes. Hi, Ann.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. So tell us ways that we can manage the emotions. Or first, let's start with, what are some of the emotions that are associated when you found out that your child has diabetes and now has to manage this chronic illness?
Yeah, so the emotions kind of run the gamut, right? Lots of people go through denial at first. I kind of relate it to the grieving cycle. So you have to kind of grieve what happened in that diagnosis, and then you have to kind of move through that to get to the other side of it. So anger, denial, sadness, and then it becomes your new normal. So it becomes more of like brushing your teeth every day, although it's a little bit more complicated than brushing your teeth. But it becomes your new normal, and you're able to kind of move through it at that point. But it goes in a cycle. So once you've been diagnosed for a while, sometimes there's a thing called burnout, and that burnout is really just emotionally, you're done with trying to take care of yourself all the time, 24 hours a day. So it comes back around, and you have to do the cycle again over and over and over again. So it's nice to have people that understand that.
That's great. And so you've actually been managing this for 10 plus years. How do you approach your child's teachers and help them to know how to best support your son?
Yeah, so my son was diagnosed when he was 3, so we started preschool. In preschool, I was much more involved. So I was in there, I was teaching the teachers all about his pump and how to manage him, and then I'd be able to talk about the fact that, Brady, when his blood sugars were high, it was harder for him to kind of focus and be part of the process, and he obviously also had emotional responses to being high because he didn't feel great. So he unfortunately got angry when he was high. So it was definitely something we had to talk through and how best to manage that within a classroom setting with other kids there. So we talked through that. And then when we got to elementary school, he wanted to educate his friends about it so that everyone in the classroom knew. So it was an opportunity for him to become an advocate for himself. And I really pushed him to become that advocate because it's his and he needs to be able to talk to other people about it in a way that makes sense for him. So we spent a lot of time kind of educating his class and his school and his teachers and the principal and the nurse. It's nurses don't always have all of the information around type 1, so sometimes it's important for our kids to be able to show their technology so that the nurses can understand a little bit more around the technology that keeps moving so fast. So he was a great part of that. When we got to middle school, it got a little bit different. Kids don't want to be different in middle school, as you well know, being a middle school teacher once upon a time, just like me. But kids don't want to be different. So in middle school, I had to take a giant step back, and I just started with emails so that teachers would know. And we have a 504 because they're all covered under a 504. So those 504 meetings were the place where I could educate them and let them know diabetes isn't just about sugar. It also takes a lot of mental thought and a lot of emotional impact on someone. And so I would be able to talk through that with his teachers, but without Brady there. He's now a freshman in high school, and I don't get to do any of it anymore. So I literally have a 504 meeting with his counselor, and we've talked through it. His counselors then talk to his teachers. But truthfully, I'm very much removed from that, and he has to advocate for himself now. So I'm so glad in elementary school that we worked on that. So now he has the ability to say those things when he needs to his high school teachers.
That's great. And you talk about the need for parents to move from the protector role to being a guide.
Oh, yes. So the protector unfortunately makes things not happen, right? So as much as we can put them in a bubble and protect them and not let anything happen, I am much more of a person that believes that we need to guide our children so that they can be in the world themselves and that we're not always having to be with them. So that guiding process is part of what we did in elementary school, is allowing him to have his voice, find it, and make sure that we keep it appropriate, right? So that he's able to say the things he needs to say, but in a way that doesn't make a teacher feel like he is telling them what to do, so that there's a respect that goes back and forth. So we really talked through that, and that guiding has helped us as we've gotten to high school and college, and hopefully college when we get there.
And one thing that you shared, too, that I thought was really powerful, you said that on average, or there are individuals who are managing type 1 diabetes who will think of it maybe 247 times a day.
Yeah. So the other piece that I would love teachers to know is literally you're teaching them a curriculum, right, to be successful at school. I'm teaching them a curriculum to stay alive. So you have to understand that our kids aren't just learning to read and do math. They're also learning how to manage blood sugars. And this is a whole nother curriculum that just doesn't exist for other kids. So my good friend Caroline is the one who did that, and she thought of diabetes 247 times in one day. And so if you think about what's something you think about for 247 times? I don't know that I think about anything 247 times a day. So that plus you have to learn to read, write, homework, write everything down, keep up with everybody else that's doing all these other things, plus play sports. It's a lot for our child to bring on. So I think just a little bit of grace and a little bit of forgiveness every now and then is very helpful for us.
That's so true. And I think maybe one of the reasons why school nurses are as familiar is because when we're talking about type 1 diabetes, we're talking about 10% of individuals that have diabetes as opposed to type 2, which is more prevalent.
Right, absolutely. And so the type 1 is an autoimmune disease. So it is very different than type 2, although they both deal with the same hormone, which is why they get the same name. But type 1 definitely is... it just takes a little bit more finesse as the best word that I can think of so that you can manage those pieces. And truthfully, once you have a diagnosis of type 1, your blood sugar will never be quote unquote normal. So we need to kind of take that out of our vocabulary. Diabetes is diabetes. Blood sugars are going to change. And so it's most important that these families and the nurses understand there's no good, there's no bad, there just is. So we have to work through using language that doesn't assign negativity or positivity when we talk about type 1. We just talk about that's what it is, what's our next action.
And also, I thought it was really powerful that you shared that a lot of the things that are typically associated, the really scary complications that are associated with type 1 diabetes or diabetes in general, that now the research shows that people are having a longer quality of life and longer life expectancy. The amputations, the vision loss, those things are not as prevalent as people think.
Right. So there was a EDIC study that was done in 2009 that compared the DCCT study in 1978, and the complications are way down. And now with the technology that we have of CGMs and pumps that speak with CGMs and all of the technology that's come out in the last 10 years, they're even less than they were in 2009. So parents come from a place of fear because they're afraid that their children are going to end up with these complications, but percentage-wise, it's just not factually right anymore. So we have to make sure that we're speaking the truth too, and not just looking at social media to get our answers.
That is so true. What advice would you give and leave with teachers and educators who want to support students who are in their classrooms and their schools who are managing type 1 diabetes?
I would tell them to just ask a lot of questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I will tell you that my son was marked as independently managing in 3rd grade, and everyone thought we were crazy. But he knew his body, and it's hard to believe that a child in 3rd grade could know their body well enough that they could manage, but he did. And if his teacher just asked him, hey, why are you doing that right now? He was happy to tell the answers and happy to explain it to them, and he would rather have you ask the question than make the judgment. So I would just say, keep talking, build that relationship with parents, and I know sometimes that can be hard because some parents are a little sometimes. But I would say that definitely that relationship between home and school is so important. And really, it's just about asking questions rather than assigning judgment.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate it.
Absolutely. I loved it. Thanks so much.
So I am here at the Type 1 Nation Diabetes Summit, and now I have the great pleasure of speaking with individuals who work in schools and have children themselves who are managing type 1 diabetes. So we'll start our introductions over here.
All right. My name is Holly Loomis. I'm a school nurse for New Hanover County, and I work for the Department of Health and Human Services.
And I also am with New Hanover County, and I'm a school nurse at a middle school.
My name is Lucrece Medlicott. I'm the librarian at Whitesville Beach Elementary School in New Hanover County and a mother of a type 1 diabetic.
So thank y'all so much for chatting with us. So y'all shared so much here at the conference. I mean, you all just had a wonderful session. I learned so much based on the things that you all shared. So talk about ways that we can support teachers who may feel a little anxious if this is the first time that they've had a diabetic in their classroom, or type 1 diabetic.
You want to go first?
Well, I would just say as a mom of a type 1 diabetic, one of the best ways to help a teacher is to partner with that teacher, or the teacher, I would say, partner with your parent. Really seek out the information from the parent. Of course, also talk with your school nurse, because the school nurse has the medical plan that's been given by the doctor and signed off by the doctor. Just communicate, a lot of good communication of what's happening at school and questions that you have. Most parents, I think, are willing to learn or to work with you and help their child.
And Lucrece, with you being a librarian, you like to use books to really educate schools and
Yes.
classrooms around this topic.
Yes, and so you could certainly get with your school nurse, or you could get with the librarian, invite your parent in, have a guest reader, let that be the parent. If the parent is working and unable, invite your librarian to come in. Your library may or may not already have books on the topic, but maybe the parent has a book, maybe the school nurse has a book. JDRF has a book, access to books, and you can bring that in. I used to change the character names to my son's name and his friends to talk about how to help your friend. There are many kid-friendly books. And invite the student to also maybe give a little spiel and show his devices, the things that he's going to be using to manage his blood sugar, so that the children don't find those things to be scary. And a library is a wonderful setting if you can ask for that.
That's great. And as school nurses, what kind of training are you all mandated to provide to teachers who are about to educate a student who's managing type 1 diabetes?
Well, we do receive the orders from the doctor. The plan, it's a diabetic plan, and it pretty much covers everything, but it's a lot. So we try to concise it into what they really need to know. If the nurse isn't there, one day or something, they need to know how to monitor blood sugars and work the equipment that the student has, and symptoms to look for, and safety factors. Not if they say they feel low and shaky, don't just send them off by themselves down the hall. They need to have an adult with them. And you can add to that.
And I know at the beginning of the school year, especially prior to school, we usually meet with the parent and the teacher as a group and open up that line of communication, and to help the teachers feel at ease because they're new from the year before. And then even the ones in the prior years will come and sit with them and also serve as a resource, so they know that they have somebody that has been experienced with that student. And then at the beginning of the year, we also provide not only training in general, we highlight low blood sugar, high blood sugar, anaphylactic reactions. We also highlight the safety precautions. We do all that as a group for the school as a whole. Some basic first aid training for that and what to look for. And then individually we'll go with the teacher, and that's going to be with that student, with the family, and then initiate those plans and basically have a care plan to help them get through the year.
So everyone has a care plan, but some families opt to have a 504 plan that goes along with diabetes. Tell us about what are some of those reasons why families may choose to have a 504 as opposed to just a traditional diabetic plan.
Thank you.
Well, the 504 plan often speaks to accommodations that a student might need in terms of being able to access education at the same level as other students. And so for a child with type 1 diabetes, if their blood sugars are high or low, sometimes, they're not going to be able to test well during those moments. They might need to treat their diabetes first. And the 504 can outline some additional needs that are beyond the medical needs that the child has, and so that they can access the education, they can test well in those times, and receive the support and understanding of the school. So that's what that is there for.
That's great.
The way I look at it is there is a law, I don't know the exact number, but a North Carolina state law that does have protections in place that really covers, it covers everything. However, if you're still finding that your student still needs help academically because of their diabetes, then the 504 would be the next step. But not every student that has diabetes needs to have a 504.
I think that's good to know, because each person manages diabetes very differently.
That's
it's
right.
a special case depending on the person and different factors.
Right. For some students, they may, not test well or not do well if their blood sugars are elevated. For my son, it didn't seem to matter as much, what his blood sugar was when he tested. But every student is different and every situation is different. And so I think, when you form that great relationship, that great partnership between parents, the nurse, the teachers, and any other folks that will get in your corner and on your team, the school is looking out for the student. They're looking out for their best interest. They're going to want to do what is going to make that child successful.
That's great. And it's also important that individuals have healthy snacks that are available to them. So how do you all navigate that in terms of providing snacks? Sometimes teachers want to provide snacks for students, but then you may need special snacks for students who are managing type 1 diabetes.
I know that some of the parents that I work with, they will control that, and they'll send in their snacks, and they'll have backup snacks for that. I usually independently have some on hand too in the health room if I need it. And then also, I've never run into any trouble about going into the school or to anybody in the school in the cafeteria and saying this, I need this, and they always provide it. So I've never had an issue with that.
I would say to parents, it's a good plan to monthly check in with the school nurse or your teacher. Do you have everything that you need for my student, for my child? I need to make sure that you have things that they can access quickly. But as you said, the cafeteria is not, going to say no in an emergency to provide what they can to help the child's blood sugar get back into control.
That's great. It's great that everybody's on the same page. And whenever individuals transition to middle school or transition to high school, sometimes that can be something additional that you need to navigate when you're going to that next level.
I would just encourage teachers, since we're talking about teachers, to still want to meet with their students. Don't just assume that because the child is getting older that they now can do more for themselves. Families are releasing control and responsibilities to those students as they get older and older. For me, my son had type 1 diabetes before he started school. For other parents, their children just learned of this diagnosis in middle school or high school. And so everybody is at a different spot in terms of what they're able to do and what a child can do for themselves. If you think of a bicycle, some kids can take the training wheels off before they ever come to kindergarten, and some kids at 5th grade, they still have the training wheels on. So you have to make sure that you are still checking in with the families. And I think setting a meeting at the beginning of the school year and with the student and the parent is a good idea, because then you can discuss how you want that to look when they're going to advocate for themselves, say in middle school or high school, and how they can become a more responsible person, because they are the one, in fact, living with that disease. I think that would be the best way.
It helps them once they have that language so they know how to advocate for themselves.
Right.
And you have to also understand that they are very structured in school. They have a schedule they follow, and each year that could change. Their lunch times can change. And then when you get into middle school, they're changing classes. So you have a larger pool of people that are going to be involved in that student's day. So that can change the whole situation too. I mean, that movement from elementary school to middle school can be a big step, and they become independent.
Right.
And I know that they, at least for my open communication with the parents and the students, they know that they can come to the school nurse. If you have a question, have a concern, or you're having a symptom, come to the school nurse. Or if the school nurse is not there, who is my backup? Letting them know who my backup is in that case.
And some teachers serve, as you get into the middle school and high school grades, they serve as club supervisors or coaches or other extracurricular activities. And I think that when you receive the information from the school nurse, that now the kid on your team or your club has this diagnosis, that you also check in with the parents and say, I don't know if you know that your kid's in a robotics club, he signed up to do that, but if there's anything I can do, let me help you navigate that. And again, I would just say that, even teachers can, maybe even the math teacher can say, hey, when you start that robotics club, make sure you tell, your teacher that you might need to eat snack in the middle of the robotics club, because that's what you do. And so I think when you're forming a nice partnership of the parents, the child, and the educators, and the surrounding staff and folks that they come into contact with, broadens, that you keep that in mind.
That's right. I think that's important. And one thing that you said too, I thought was important. It's okay to make sure that you involve their peers, so that their peers can support them, so that they understand there's nothing to be afraid of, that we can navigate this together, and having that support of their friends really helps.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really key. It helps the child to advocate for themselves as they move on. One day they move out, and we want them to. It says will be to see them go, but they do move on, and to have their best life, they need to know how to seek that support beyond, their families and their teachers and their coaches, but also their friend groups to support them as well. And so again, from the earliest ages, if you can invite, a parent in, if you can let your child talk and teach his classmates, and as the years go on, speak to the fact that my best friend helped me in this moment, this is what he did for me to help me. Those are good things, and for all kids.
Well, thank you all so much for helping us to learn more about type 1 diabetes and how we can support the children.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's been a great day at the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation Type 1 Nation Summit. We look forward to seeing you all next week on Tar Heel Teachers on the Road.